I'm sure you've noticed how a professional guitar player, when they approach taking a solo, it always seems so deliberate and on purpose, and generally sounds pretty darn good. Now, I've been fortunate enough to surround myself with professional guitar players for a long time, and by virtue of that, I've been able to learn a whole lot from them, and that's exactly what I'm going to be sharing with you in this video, where I'm going to show you how the pros build a solo on guitar. Just be sure to stick around to the very end of the video because I've got a free gift for you and your guitar that you're going to love. So the first thing I want to make clear, when you're looking at how professionals play guitar solos, you got to understand that they're not using any secret notes, right? We have access to the same musical information that they do. So 12 notes in Western music, they still toe that same exact line. What it comes down to is how they navigate using those notes and how they expressly perform them when they play. Now, a typical approach for, let's say, more of a hobbyist guitar player when it comes to building a solo is to sticking to one particular scale, or maybe two scales, but it's generally keeping the options pretty limited because there's just only a couple scales that they're comfortable with playing. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But, you know, if you're a professional musician, you gotta have options. You gotta have different ways of approaching how you create a solo, because you wanna obviously show that you have some command over music theory and just the understanding of notes and melody and all that good stuff. So it really comes down to options, and this is where learning multiple scales can be helpful. So taking, for example, that G major backing track that I was playing over at the beginning of the video, I'm going to go over the options that I had laid out in front of me and what I used as far as scales. So it's in the key of G major, but it starts on the 4 chord, and there's a particular tonality to it that I believe it gives it that Lydian kind of sound. So what that told me is that C Lydian would actually work great, you know, as something to throw in there. It has a very distinct sound, right? It's quite a departure from your typical, you know, major scale, minor scale, or even major minor pentatonic. And when in the backing track, the progression would resolve to the 1 chord, in G, that's the perfect opportunity to throw in multiple scales like G major, or G major pentatonic, which is essentially the same as E minor pentatonic, right? If you're thinking in terms of relative major and minor, which will come into play later on in the backing track because there's a second movement to it that actually involves an E minor chord, right? There's a progression that's E minor, C, G, D. So we have a 6, 4, 1, 5, in the key of G major. Those are the chords. So all that stuff is going to come into play as far as how we use these options that we've talked about. Now, generally, taking the single scale approach, like let's say G major pentatonic / E minor pentatonic, if you were to use that over the entire track, you could actually get away with building a great solo. But if you're wanting to expand beyond that and explore new types of emotions, right, especially like a mode like that Lydian mode, really gives it a very ethereal kind of sound. But there's a certain timing where that Lydian mode pops out the most, and that's when you hear the 4 chord C. It's when you hear that in the backing track, which is what it leads with. So it starts with that chord, and then it resolves it to the 1. So the way that a professional guitar player would approach that is it all comes down to making sure that you are, if you're going to be departing from using, let's say, a scale that will work pretty much all of the time, which is like major pentatonic in this case, G major pentatonic. If you want to be a little adventurous and explore more complex emotions like the C Lydian mode, you want to make sure that you time it right so that you're playing it over that C chord in the backing track. Because what's going to happen is once it moves to resolve, this is just going to turn into, the C Lydian mode is just going to turn into the G major scale. So you can actually play through C Lydian, and then once you hear the 1 chord, so I'm still playing through the actual pattern of G major, the G Ionian mode, right? But when that C chord hits in the backing track, it really pops out as C Lydian. So it's not so much what I'm doing. I'm kind of just towing the line with the G major mode, but or the G major scale. But I'm still like, you get to hear that Lydian tonality once you hear that 4 chord. And all that's to give you a glimpse on what's going through the mind of a professional guitar player typically when they encounter a movement like that in a chord progression. So when that 4 chord really lets that 𝗙 mode come through, a professional guitar player will want to exploit that so that you have that time during the chord progression, during the movement of the backing, right, to really just like let that tonality come through. And when you resolve to the 1 chord, especially in a major key like this, like I said, you have multiple options that you can weave in and out of. You have the G Ionian, right, or G major scale. Then you also have G major pentatonic, you can use that if you're already comfortable and familiar with, let's say, the major pentatonic scale, or even the minor pentatonic. If you want to think in terms of minor pentatonic, you would think in the relative minor. So if you already know where E minor pentatonic is, let's say in the open position, right, or up here and on 12th fret, you can use that, but when you're playing it over a G major, that's the major chord, the relative major of it, so it's going to work. But just having these options isn't really enough, because let's say you know how to play all these scales, but you're still not sure how you can make them sound musical or particularly interesting. So what you want to do is take the tools that are the scales and learn how to properly use them. So it comes down to ideas, right? The difference between a professional guitar player and, let's say, a hobbyist, a lot of it comes down to, like, the professional guitar player generally was put under a lot of pressure to come up with good ideas, so it keeps getting them hired, so that when they play something, it always captivates an audience, right? So, but in order to do that, it doesn't require anything really flashy. It just requires thinking in terms of melody. So thinking in terms of themes. When you're building a solo, you're telling a story. So if, let's say, going back to that backing track as an example, right? It starts on that 4 chord, right? And you can hear that Lydian, that really comes out. So you can start with a thematic lick just within the Lydian mode, and you could be right here, right in that position, and then just borrow a couple notes from that mode and let it just really shine through. Something like that. And then once it moves to the 1 chord, you can, let's say, do a similar theme that's like ba-dum-bum-bum or whatever. Don't worry about the pitch of what I'm singing, just in terms of the rhythm of that, right? And then if we wanted to let that resolve on the 1 chord, so we can go something like this. So that way, I'm landing right there on a 3rd, the G major, which is a B note, right? And that kind of helps imply, since I'm targeting a chord tone here with that 3rd, so we have that, and then, see how there's a theme going, and then I can keep up just like that rhythm, just like adapting it to different parts of the scale. And I can keep it going if I wanted to, So it doesn't really matter as far as, not to say that it doesn't matter what notes you're playing, but you can stay within the notes of the scale and just apply that thematic rhythm so that you're actually creating phrases and you're not just sitting there just kind of going up and down a scale and just hoping the notes land. You want to be more deliberate. You want it to sound more on purpose. So what really helps is to think of a theme, and it can just be a handful of notes. Then you can expand on that theme. So this is how you can actually use the multitude of scales that we have to work with, over a backing track like that, and actually have it be a lot more musical and a lot more interesting. And hey, real quick, if you're getting some value out of this lesson, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. It really helps us out, and it lets us know that you're enjoying these lessons and you would like to see more of them, which we'd be more than happy to give you. So thanks in advance, and let's get back to business. Now let's talk about that second movement, that B section of the backing track, where you could hear a full chord progression of E minor, C, G, and D. Remember that 6, 4, 1, 5. So in that kind of a movement, what inspired what I was doing is I felt like just outlining triads, right? So like I started with this E minor triad here, which is just like on the 9th fret here, 9th fret, 9th fret, right? On the D and G strings, and then 8th fret on B. And then there is the C major triad, all within the same 3 strings, D, G, and B, right? So 10th fret, 9th fret, 8th fret. And then the one chord, G major triad here. That's a first inversion G major triad. So it's 9th fret, 7th fret, 8th fret. And then for that D major triad, and the second inversion here, which is just barring the 7th fret on the G, B, and G, D, and B string. Now just outlining those, just in a kind of a melodic way. I was like, so you can hear the chords moving without even, like, I haven't even turned the backing track on, and you can hear the chords. And you know, a part like that in a backing track, it's like perfect to actually outline chord tones like this. This is an example of like playing over chord changes. So I'm not just sitting there just going. You're just sticking to just like major pentatonic. I was actually following the chords. Now the trick when it comes to, or the key rather, when it comes to playing over changes is you have to time correctly what chords you're playing those target notes over. Because you got to be careful, because if let's say a D chord's playing and you're playing a C chord, right? You're actually going to create this like Motown chord, which is a little too happy for what we're going for, right? So you just want to make sure that you're timing correctly, right? The triads with the full chord, you know, that they're supposed to represent, that the backing track is playing, you know? And then just trying to find those bass notes, right? So we have, you know, E minor, C major, G major, D major. So that's one, you know, one approach to it. So again, I'm just giving you a way into like what's going through the mind of a professional guitar player. And it really comes down to making sure that you can time correctly. If you're going to play over the changes, you're timing correctly what notes you're playing over what changes, and you're actually anticipating the chords that are coming. So this is kind of where, you know, this is the type of approach where you probably want to hear the backing track make one full cycle so you can anticipate what's going to happen. Because if you're just kind of shooting in the dark, you might, you know, you risk playing, you know, what would be considered a wrong note. Where if you're playing, let's say, you know, like I said, a C over a D, which is an interesting sound, but it's too much of a departure from the theme that this backing track represents. It's a very like pop ballad with, you know, some spaciness thrown in with that whole Lydian thing. And let me show you how I was playing those triads too. So, and of course, you can weave in scales along with, you know, outlining these triads. So what I was doing is kind of arpeggiating them, right? And then adding in scale notes. And then, so combining that with arpeggiating those triads. And sometimes skipping notes is nice too. You can go in like sixth intervals. You know, which are really just, I'm just playing like the lowest note and the highest note of the triad and just skipping that middle note. That's one way you can do it, you know. You have to think about the approach to improvising as there's a whole bunch of possibilities on how you can do it. You know, there's that old saying, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And it's the truth when it comes to, you know, if skinning a cat was improvisation, there's way more than one way to do it. So when you're faced with a multitude of options, you know, rather than getting overwhelmed and trying to decide on what you're going to play, because that's not really what a pro does. A pro, and I only know this, I'm not trying to say like I'm some kind of big fancy pro player, but it's like, I've been around, I've spent a lot of time with pro players. Like I always try to be the worst musician in a room, you know, because that's how I learn. And I've just been like hungrily learning for, you know, almost 2 decades now, getting the chance to be around professional players. And I notice patterns in the way that they approach improv, right? And this is one way where when they have all these options, they make sure to center it around a theme, and they just adapt whatever scale or triadic movement or whatever seems to fit that theme, and then they just make it work. And sometimes they'll experiment, they'll try things. You know, generally trial and error happens, you know, when you're at home playing, but could also happen when you're playing live. If you just feel like being a little daring and trying something new. That happens. I mean, I do that a lot. I take a lot of risks, and I also make a lot of mistakes, but I learn from that process, right? But when you're just practicing at home to a backing track like this one, you know, there's really no judgment attached. So you can just try things and then using process of elimination, figure out what you actually enjoy the most. So to quickly recap, these are the options that we have as far as scales over this backing track, which I'm going to throw on in a minute and run through these examples again. We have that C Lydian. We have G major. We have G major pentatonic / E minor pentatonic. All right, and then we have those triads. So if we wanted to use that in the B section of the backing track, where we hear that E minor, I mean, it doesn't have to be in this position. It can be like I play around E minor here. And then when I hear that 4 chord, which is where Lydian works, or I can totally throw in Lydian for a little bit, but it quickly moves to the next chord, which is the 1 chord. Then going to that 1 chord, I can highlight that chord, and then when the 5 chord comes along, you know, I can do that, and I can stick to a theme that allows the melodies to really, you know, flow. So it doesn't just sound like I'm just ascending and descending a scale. So I'm going to throw on that backing track, and then I'll walk through that exact same process so you can hear it again. So if I were to look back and do kind of a play-by-play of what I just did, the most important thing I would say out of everything I did, all my note choices, all that stuff, the most important thing, honestly, was the space I left between the notes. This is how you find themes. Because if you know, are, again, just playing a linear back and forth kind of pattern, there's no rhythmic variation to it. I mean, it's not really musical. You're just reciting the scale while not using it. You're not using it to do anything expressive. So a simple way to do that, even if you were going up and down the scale, not that I recommend that, because then you get caught in the trap of that's how you use scales, but the way to use them, you have to think of scales as tools, right? If you don't have the ability to use a bunch of tools that you have, then the tools do you no good. So little things like just leaving space, playing, let's say, 4 notes at a time, leaving some space, then playing another 4 notes, leaving some space, playing another 4 notes, something like that. That at least will give you a much more deliberate kind of framework to actually build something that's not only just a guitar solo, but something that qualifies as something musical and expressive. So you've just been given an inside look on how a pro guitar player builds a guitar solo in a way that doesn't necessarily break any ground as far as any kind of secret scale or special collection of notes. It's really just coming down to having the right strategy to using the same notes that we all have access to. And of course, with a topic like this, there's so much more to explore beyond just what we cover in this video. But you don't even need to worry about what next step you should take. In fact, I've done all that thinking for you. And that's all thanks to something very special that I'm going to share with you right now. You remember that free gift I owe you? Well, I got it right here. This right here is the fretboard conveyor belt. This is a system that I've developed over years and years of trial and error, and it's already helped thousands upon thousands of guitar players just like yourself in the online space learn how to confidently navigate their fretboard in any musical key and in multiple styles, just like what the pros can do. So be sure to click here to claim your free copy or check that link in the description box. Whether or not you have aspirations to become a professional musician, it's still very rewarding and fulfilling to learn how to play guitar the same way that they do.